The phone call came at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, jarring me from the first decent sleep I'd had in weeks. Detective Sarachin here, and after 15 years on the force, I thought I'd seen everything. The voice on the other end was shaky, barely above a whisper. Detective Chin? This is Officer Martinez from the night shift. We've got something unusual. A break-in at 1247 Maple Street, but the homeowner is insisting nothing was taken. Says someone was just watching her sleep. I pulled on my clothes, already knowing this wouldn't be a standard burglary call. The address was in Riverside Heights, one of those cookie-cutter suburban neighborhoods where the biggest crime was usually stolen packages. But something in Martinez's voice told me this was different. The house looked normal from the outside. 2-story colonial, manicured lawn, minivan in the driveway. Jessica Hartwell met me at the door, mid-30s, wearing a bathrobe over pajamas. Her hands trembled as she led me inside. I woke up around 2 a.m., she explained, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. There was this feeling, like someone was staring at me. I opened my eyes and there was a figure standing in the corner of my bedroom. Just standing there. Did you get a good look at the intruder? That's the thing. Jessica wrapped her arms around herself. They didn't run when I screamed. They just stood there for maybe 10 more seconds, then calmly walked out through the sliding door. Like they wanted me to see them. I examined the bedroom. No signs of forced entry, no disturbance except for muddy footprints on the carpet. Size 10 boots, men's. The sliding door was unlocked, but Jessica swore she'd locked it before bed. Has anything like this happened before, Mrs. Hartwell? She hesitated. There have been little things. My mail arrives opened and resealed. Items in my house moved slightly, nothing stolen, just repositioned. Photos on my mantel rearranged. I thought I was losing my mind. I took detailed notes, photographed everything, dusted for prints. Standard procedure, but my gut was telling me this wasn't standard at all. As I was leaving, Jessica grabbed my arm. Detective, there's something else. Last week, I found a USB drive on my kitchen counter. I never put it there. Did you look at what was on it? Her face went pale. Photos. Hundreds of photos of me. Sleeping, showering, getting dressed. Going back months. Maybe years. The weight of her words hit me like a physical blow. Do you still have it? I threw it away. I was so scared, so violated. I just wanted it gone. I spent the next 3 days diving into Jessica's case. No criminal history, no ex-boyfriends with restraining orders, no obvious enemies. But as I dug deeper, I found something that made my blood run cold. Jessica Hartwell had been getting random home security system offers in the mail for 6 months. Not the usual junk mail, personalized letters mentioning specific details about her house, her schedule, her habits. The company didn't exist when I tried to trace it. On Thursday, I got another call. This time it was Jessica, sobbing into the phone. Detective, you have to come. Now. Please. I found her sitting on her front steps, suitcase beside her. I can't stay here anymore, she said. Last night, I set up my phone to record while I slept. This morning, I watched the footage. She handed me her phone with shaking hands. The video was grainy, shot in night vision mode, but clear enough. At 2:33 a.m., a figure entered the bedroom. For 6 minutes and 43 seconds, they stood perfectly still, watching Jessica sleep. But here's what made my skin crawl: they knew about the camera. At one point, the figure turned and looked directly at it, raising a gloved hand in a small wave. There's more, Jessica whispered. I found another USB drive this morning. On my pillow. What happened next changed everything. You won't want to miss how it unfolded. The second USB drive contained a video file dated 3 days ago, footage of me investigating Jessica's house. Someone had been watching us both, recording my every move during the initial investigation. But that wasn't the worst part. The video showed angles that were impossible unless the camera had been inside the house the entire time. Shots from inside closets, from behind furniture, from vantage points that would require someone to be present during my investigation. Someone had been there, watching me work, and I never knew. I immediately called for backup and returned to Jessica's house with a full forensics team. What we found in the walls changed everything I thought I knew about the case. Hidden cameras. Dozens of them, installed with professional precision throughout the house. Some looked recent, but others showed signs of being there for years. The wiring ran through the walls to a central hub in the basement, a setup that would have required extensive knowledge of the house's construction. "Detective," called out forensics specialist Kim Torres from the basement. "You need to see this." The basement had been converted into a surveillance center. Multiple monitors, recording equipment, and filing cabinets filled with meticulous documentation. Photos of Jessica organized by date, detailed logs of her daily routines, work schedules, medical appointments. Someone had been studying her life with obsessive precision. But it was the other files that made me realize how deep this went. Jessica wasn't the only victim. 17 other women. 17 other houses. 17 other lives under surveillance. The files went back 8 years, showing a pattern of escalation. It started with external observation, photos taken through windows, then progressed to break-ins, installation of cameras, and psychological intimidation. One file was marked, concluded, in red ink. Maria Santos, age 34, had lived at 892 Pine Avenue. I recognized the address. 3 years ago, Maria had been found dead in her home, apparent heart attack caused by a pre-existing condition. But according to these files, she'd been under surveillance for 2 years before her death. The final entry, dated the day she died, simply read, "Subject experienced complete psychological breakdown. Mission accomplished." I was staring at evidence of systematic psychological torture, possibly connected to at least one death. But who was behind it? The files contained no names, no identifying information about the perpetrator. Just meticulous documentation of destroyed lives. "Detective Chin?" Torres called from another corner of the basement. "There's something else." She was standing in front of a wall covered with building blueprints. Not just Jessica's house, all 18 properties. Detailed architectural plans showing every room, every entrance, every hiding spot. But these weren't public records. These were original construction blueprints, the kind only available to contractors and city planners. That's when I noticed the signature in the corner of each blueprint. The same architectural firm, Morrison and Associates. I'd heard that name before, but couldn't place where. I ran the firm's name through our database and found my answer. Morrison and Associates had designed and overseen construction for most of Riverside Heights, including Jessica's neighborhood. But the firm had closed 5 years ago when the owner, David Morrison, was investigated for fraud and embezzlement. The investigation was dropped when Morrison disappeared, presumably fleeing to avoid prosecution. But according to city records, Morrison had retained access to all his company's files, including the architectural plans for every house they built. He would know the layout of hundreds of homes, including hidden spaces perfect for surveillance equipment. I was close to identifying our suspect, but I needed more evidence. That's when I made a decision that still haunts me. I decided to use Jessica as bait. This is the climax. Everything you've been waiting for is right here. Stay to see the hero put everyone in their place. I convinced Jessica to return to her house for one night, with our full surveillance team watching from unmarked vehicles. If Morrison was still monitoring her, he'd see her return and might make a move. What I didn't anticipate was how personal this had become for him. At 11:43 p.m., our thermal imaging detected movement in the house. Someone was inside, but not where we expected. The figure was in the walls themselves, moving through spaces between rooms that shouldn't have existed. Morrison had done more than install cameras. He'd modified the house's structure, creating hidden passages that let him move freely without being detected. He'd been living in the walls of these houses, existing in the spaces between normal life and complete invasion of privacy. Our team moved in, but Morrison was always one step ahead. He knew every hiding spot, every escape route. As we searched the house, I realized he was herding us towards something. The basement surveillance room had been cleared out, but there was a new addition, a chair facing the monitors, with restraints attached. He hadn't just been watching these women. He'd been preparing to take the next step. I found Jessica tied to the chair, conscious but terrified. Morrison stood behind her, not with a weapon, but with a camera. "Detective Chin," he said calmly, as if we were meeting for coffee. "I was hoping you'd join us. You've been so dedicated to this case." David Morrison looked nothing like a monster. Mid-50s, average height, the kind of man you'd pass on the street without a second glance. That's what made him so effective. "You built all of this," I said, trying to keep him talking while my team positioned themselves upstairs. "The surveillance, the psychological torture. Why?" "Control," he answered simply. "Do you know what it's like to build someone's home, to know every inch of their private space, and then watch them live their oblivious little lives? They invited me in when they hired my firm. I just never left." Jessica was crying silently, but Morrison seemed oblivious to her distress. He was focused on me. "You're just like them, detective. So sure of your safety, your privacy. But I've been watching you too. I know you live alone at 428 Cedar Street. I know you check your locks twice before bed. I know about the nightmares that wake you up at 3 a.m. My blood turned to ice. He'd been in my house. "The difference is," Morrison continued, "you're not helpless like them. You're a challenge worth documenting." That's when I realized the full scope of his plan. This wasn't just about Jessica anymore. He'd used her case to draw me in, to make me part of his collection. The USB drives, the obvious surveillance, it was all designed to make me investigate, to make me personally invested. I was his next target. The standoff lasted 37 minutes. Morrison had rigged the basement with cameras broadcasting live to some unknown audience. He was turning our confrontation into entertainment. But his obsession with control became his weakness. He was so focused on orchestrating the perfect finale that he didn't notice Jessica working her restraints loose. When she broke free and tackled him, I had my chance. We arrested David Morrison without a shot fired, but the investigation revealed the true scope of his crimes. Morrison had been conducting what he called behavioral studies on his victims. He documented their responses to increasing levels of psychological pressure, treating human beings like lab rats in an elaborate experiment. The data he'd collected filled dozens of hard drives, years of stolen privacy turned into research material. We found evidence connecting him to 7 suspicious deaths over the past decade, all women who'd been under his surveillance. Their deaths had been ruled natural or accidental, but Morrison's files showed he'd driven each of them to complete psychological breakdown before they died. The trial made national headlines. Morrison showed no remorse, treating the proceedings like another opportunity to study human behavior. He was sentenced to life without parole, but even behind bars, he continued his research, studying prison staff and fellow inmates. But here's what still keeps me awake at night: we never found all of his surveillance equipment. Our search of the 18 known houses revealed cameras and recording devices, but Morrison's files indicated a much larger operation. Hundreds of properties, thousands of potential victims. 3 months after Morrison's arrest, I received a package at my home address. Inside was a USB drive and a note. "The student has become the teacher. Your work is being continued." The drive contained recent footage from inside my house. Someone else had picked up where Morrison left off. I moved twice in the following year, changed my phone number, altered my daily routines. But sometimes, late at night, I still feel eyes watching me from the darkness. And I wonder, in a world where cameras are everywhere, where our private lives are constantly documented and analyzed, how many David Morrisons are out there? How many people are living in the spaces between our walls, studying us, learning our patterns, waiting for the perfect moment to step out of the shadows? The case was closed, but the fear never ends. Because the most terrifying truth I learned is that we're never truly alone. Someone is always watching, always documenting, always learning how to control us. And they're getting better at staying hidden. I never thought a routine estate sale would destroy everything I believed about my neighbor of 15 years. My name is Detective Marcus Riley, and I've worked homicide for the Chicago PD for over a decade. But this story isn't about a body or a crime scene. It's about Thomas Brennan, the quiet man who lived 3 houses down from me in our suburban neighborhood, and the discovery that made me question everyone I thought I knew. Thomas died of a heart attack on a Thursday morning. Natural causes, no investigation needed. He was 63, lived alone since his wife passed 5 years ago, kept to himself but was always polite when we crossed paths. The kind of neighbor who shoveled your driveway without being asked and never complained about anything. His niece, Sandra, called me the following week. She knew I was police and asked if I could be present when she cleaned out his house, just as a precaution, she said. Thomas had been intensely private, and she was nervous about going through his belongings alone. Uncle Thomas was particular about his privacy, Sandra explained as we stood on his front porch. He never let anyone inside his house. Not once in all the years I knew him. Even when Mom was alive, he'd meet us at restaurants or come to our place. The house looked normal from the outside. Well-maintained colonial, neat lawn, nothing unusual. But the moment Sandra unlocked the front door, I felt something was off. The living room was sparse, almost clinical. Basic furniture, no personal touches, no photographs. It looked like a waiting room, not a home where someone had lived for decades. "This doesn't feel like Uncle Thomas," Sandra murmured, running her finger along the dust-free mantel. "He was warm, funny. This place feels like nobody lived here at all." We moved through the kitchen, same sterile feeling. Empty counters, minimal appliances, refrigerator containing only the basics. But then Sandra opened a door I assumed led to a pantry. It was a staircase leading down to the basement. "I didn't know he had a basement," she said, flicking on the light switch. What we found downstairs made my cop instincts scream danger, even though nothing was technically illegal. The basement had been converted into what could only be described as a shrine. Every wall was lined with shelves, and those shelves were filled with toys. Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands. But these weren't antique collectibles or valuable vintage items. These were modern toys, still in their original packaging. Dolls, action figures, board games, stuffed animals. All clearly meant for children, organized by age group and gender with obsessive precision. Sandra stared in shock. "What is this? Why would Uncle Thomas have all these toys?" Each shelf was labeled with meticulous handwriting. Ages 5 to 7, girls, ages 8 to 10, boys, toddler toys, teenagers. The organization was so systematic it looked like a store's inventory room. But it was the notebooks that made my blood run cold. Dozens of spiral-bound notebooks sat on a desk in the corner. I opened one at random and found page after page of detailed observations written in Thomas's neat handwriting. Emma Chin, age 6, rides pink bicycle to school. Prefers dolls over sports equipment. Birthday party observed through fence, received stuffed unicorn, showed immediate attachment. Michael Foster, age 9, walks alone to bus stop. Carries superhero backpack. Mother works late shifts. No father figure present. Page after page of notes about neighborhood children. Their schedules, their preferences, their family situations. Thomas had been documenting the lives of every child in our area for years. Sandra was reading over my shoulder, her face growing pale. "Marcus, this is about your kids, isn't it? Emma and Michael, those are your children." She was right. Thomas had been watching my family, taking notes about my 7-year-old daughter and 9-year-old son. He knew Emma's favorite stuffed animal, Michael's fear of dogs, their school schedules, their friends' names. I flipped through more notebooks, finding entries about dozens of children from our neighborhood and the surrounding blocks. The level of detail was staggering. He knew which kids were struggling in school, which ones had problems at home, which ones were isolated or vulnerable. But here's what made it truly disturbing. Every observation was written with genuine care and concern. Thomas wasn't documenting these children with malicious intent. His notes read like those of a worried grandfather, someone who noticed when kids seemed sad or needed help. "Look at this," Sandra whispered, pointing to another section of the basement. There were wrapped presents everywhere. Hundreds of gifts, each tagged with a child's name, age, and specific interests. For Emma R. Loves unicorns and purple things. For Michael R. Fascinated by space and planets. These weren't random toys. Every gift had been carefully selected based on Thomas's detailed observations of each child's personality and preferences. Sandra found a calendar on the desk, filled with notes about birthdays, school events, and family situations. Thomas had been tracking the lives of neighborhood children with the dedication of a professional social worker. "I don't understand," Sandra said, her voice shaking. "Was he planning something terrible? Why would he collect all this information?" That's when I found the letters. What happened next changed everything. You won't want to miss how it unfolded. Hidden in the desk drawer were dozens of handwritten letters, all addressed to various children in the neighborhood but never sent. I opened one addressed to a 10-year-old girl named Amy Patterson. "Dear Amy, I noticed you seemed sad lately when you walked to school. I wanted you to know that someone cares about you. I selected a special book about brave girls who overcome difficult situations. I hope it brings you comfort during this difficult time with your parents' divorce." Another letter, to a 12-year-old boy. "Dear Kevin, I've observed that the other children exclude you from their games. This breaks my heart because I can see what a kind, intelligent boy you are. I've chosen some science kits that match your interests. You're going to do amazing things someday." Every letter expressed genuine compassion and concern. Thomas had been watching these children not as a predator, but as someone who desperately wanted to help them. Someone who saw their struggles and loneliness, and felt compelled to do something about it. But why had he never actually helped? Why collect all these gifts and write these letters without ever reaching out? The answer was in the final notebook, the one that contained Thomas's personal thoughts rather than observations about children. "I know how this looks," one entry read. "I know that a 60-year-old man watching children and collecting toys would be misunderstood. But I see so much pain in these young faces, so much loneliness that the adults in their lives are too busy to notice. I was that lonely child once. I remember how it felt to be invisible, to have no one who cared about my fears or dreams. I can't approach these children directly, that would frighten them and their parents. But I can watch over them, at least. I can be ready to help if they ever need it. I've imagined 100 scenarios where I might step in. If a child was truly in danger, if someone was being hurt, if a family was in crisis. I have gifts ready for birthdays that might be forgotten, comfort items for children going through trauma. I'm prepared to be the guardian angel these kids don't know they have." The truth hit me like a physical blow. Thomas Brennan wasn't a predator. He was a profoundly lonely man who had channeled his isolation into an obsessive desire to protect and care for the neighborhood children from a distance. He had never approached a single child. Never sent a single gift. Never acted inappropriately in any way. He had simply watched and worried and prepared to help in ways that he knew would never be accepted or understood. Sandra was crying as she read through more of Thomas's personal entries. "He writes about losing his own children," she said. "I never knew Uncle Thomas had children." I found the entries she was referring to. Thomas and his wife had lost twin daughters in a car accident 23 years ago. The girls were 6 years old. After that tragedy, he and his wife had withdrawn from social life, and after she died, he had retreated even further into isolation. "I see Sarah and Emma and every little girl who rides her bicycle past my window," one entry read. "I see their laughter in the playground across the street. These children have become my connection to the daughters I lost. Watching over them gives my life purpose, even if they'll never know I exist." The basement wasn't a predator's lair. It was a memorial to lost parenthood, a shrine built by a man who had so much love to give but no appropriate way to express it. But as Sandra and I continued exploring, we found something that changed everything again. This is the climax. Everything you've been waiting for is right here. Stayed to see how it all unfolded. In the very back of the basement, behind the shelves of toys, was a small door I initially thought was a utility closet. When I opened it, I found a narrow room that made my stomach drop. The walls were covered with photographs. Not the innocent observational notes we'd been finding, but surveillance photos taken with a telephoto lens. Pictures of children in their bedrooms, taken through windows. Children changing clothes, sleeping, bathing. Sandra gasped and turned away, but I forced myself to look closer. These weren't recent photos. The children in the images were teenagers now, but the photos showed them as young children. Some were dated 15 years ago. Thomas's watching hadn't been as innocent as his letters suggested. At the bottom of a box, I found video equipment and hours of recorded footage. Children playing in their yards, walking to school, sitting in their bedrooms doing homework. All filmed from hidden vantage points around the neighborhood. But it was the final discovery that broke my understanding of everything we'd found. Hidden beneath the video equipment was a small journal, written in a different handwriting. The entries were signed Helen, Thomas's deceased wife. "Thomas doesn't know I've found his collection," one entry read. "I've been watching him watch these children for months. At first I thought it was grief over Sarah and Emma. But it's becoming something else. Something darker. I found the photos today. My husband isn't the man I thought I married. I don't know what to do. If I report him, it will destroy everything. But if I don't, and something happens to one of these children, I've been throwing away the photos when I find them, deleting the videos from his computer when he's not home. I think I've been protecting these families without them ever knowing. But I'm getting sicker, and I won't be here much longer to stop him." The final entry was dated just weeks before Helen's death. "I've hidden the worst of it where Thomas will never find it. After I'm gone, maybe someone will discover the truth. These children deserve protection, even if it means destroying my husband's memory." Helen had been fighting a secret war against her husband's obsession, protecting the neighborhood children while pretending to be a loving wife. She had died knowing the truth about Thomas but never reporting it, choosing instead to sabotage his activities from within. The toys, the gifts, the caring letters, they had all been Thomas's way of rationalizing his voyeuristic obsession. He had convinced himself he was protecting these children while actually violating their privacy in the most fundamental way. I called for backup and had the entire basement processed as a crime scene. We found evidence of Thomas's surveillance activities going back nearly 2 decades, involving dozens of children who were now adults. But here's what haunts me most: Helen's intervention had worked. After she died 5 years ago, Thomas's activities had largely stopped. The recent notebooks contained only distant observations, no more photography or video recording. His wife's secret campaign had saved those children, and she had died without ever receiving credit for her courage. We contacted every family whose children had been documented in Thomas's files. The conversations were devastating, parents learning that their neighbor had been watching their children's most private moments for years. Some families moved away immediately. Others installed security systems and counseled their children about strangers, never knowing the stranger had been living 3 houses down. Sandra found me a week later, devastated by what her uncle had done but also confused by Helen's heroism. "She saved those children," Sandra said. "But she never saved herself from living with a monster." "Maybe she did save herself," I replied. "Maybe stopping him was the only way she could live with herself." The case was closed without charges, since Thomas was dead and Helen had destroyed the most damaging evidence years ago. But I still live in the same neighborhood, and I still see these families every day. Sometimes I catch a parent watching their children more closely than they used to, or notice new locks on bedroom windows, or see a family that used to let their kids play freely in the yard now keeping them closer to home. Thomas Brennan died believing he was a protector. His neighbors learned he was a predator. But only I know the truth that his wife Helen was the real guardian of our children, fighting a battle no one knew was being waged. The most terrifying part isn't what Thomas did. It's wondering how many other Helens are out there right now, silently protecting us from dangers we don't even know exist, carrying secrets that would destroy everything if they were ever revealed. In our neighborhood, we thought we knew everyone. We thought we were safe. But behind every normal facade, someone might be watching, documenting, obsessing. And behind every watcher, someone else might be fighting to protect us, dying with secrets they can never share. The watchers are always among us. The question is, who's watching them? The complaint seemed routine when it landed on my desk that Tuesday morning. Detective Lisa Hoffman here, and I've handled hundreds of these cases, neighbor disputes, harassment claims, the usual suburban drama. But this one would keep me awake for months. Margaret Chin had called our department 3 times in 2 weeks, insisting that her neighbor, Eleanor Vance, was watching her through the walls. Margaret lived at 847 Sycamore Drive, a quiet cul-de-sac where the biggest excitement was usually someone's lawn getting too long. She knows things, Margaret had told the dispatcher. Things she couldn't possibly know unless she was somehow seeing inside my house. She knows when I'm cooking dinner, when I'm having arguments with my husband, when my daughter comes home late from school. I knocked on Margaret's door expecting to find a paranoid homeowner obsessing over a nosy neighbor. Instead, I found a terrified woman who had documented weeks of impossible surveillance. Margaret was in her early 40s, worked as an accountant, seemed perfectly rational. She invited me into her living room and showed me a notebook filled with incidents that had unnerved her. Last Tuesday, Eleanor stopped me at the mailbox and said she hoped my husband's back was feeling better. The thing is, Detective, David hurt his back moving furniture in our bedroom 3 days earlier. He never left the house, never mentioned it to anyone. How could she know? Margaret flipped through pages of similar incidents. Eleanor commenting on Margaret's daughter's math test results, knowing when Margaret had called in sick to work, asking about Margaret's mother's medical appointment that only family members knew about. Maybe she's just observant, I suggested. Some people notice patterns, remember details. Eleanor lives alone in the house behind ours, Margaret interrupted. Our backyards don't even touch. She'd have to be actively spying to know these things. And Detective, there's something else. Margaret led me to her kitchen window. Eleanor moved in 8 months ago. Since then, she's made comments about private conversations that happened in this exact room. Conversations we had with the windows closed, curtains drawn, voices lowered. I looked across the backyard toward Eleanor's house. The distance was significant, maybe 150 feet with trees and a fence in between. Even with high-powered equipment, it would be difficult to monitor the Chen household so precisely. Have you spoken to Eleanor directly about this? I tried, Margaret said, wrapping her arms around herself. She just smiles and says she cares about the neighborhood. That she likes to keep an eye on everyone to make sure we're all safe and happy. I decided to pay Eleanor Vance a visit. Eleanor answered her door before I finished knocking, as if she'd been watching my approach through the peephole. She was a woman in her mid-50s, well-dressed, with the kind of warm smile that immediately put people at ease. Detective Hoffman, she said before I introduced myself. I've been expecting you. Please come in. Her house was immaculate, decorated with the kind of personal touches that suggested someone who took pride in their home. Family photos, fresh flowers, everything perfectly arranged. Mrs. Chin has made some concerning allegations, I began. Margaret's upset, Eleanor said, settling into an armchair that faced the front window. I understand why. She values her privacy, and she feels like I know too much about her life. Do you know too much about her life? Eleanor's smile never wavered. I pay attention, Detective. When you live alone, you become very aware of your surroundings. You notice patterns, changes, when things seem off. Mrs. Chen says you know details about private conversations that happened inside her house. I have excellent hearing, Eleanor replied. And people are louder than they think they are. Sound carries in interesting ways, especially on quiet evenings. She was plausible, but something felt off. Eleanor was too calm, too prepared for my questions. And there was something about the way she positioned herself in that chair, always facing the window with a clear view of the street. "Would you mind if I looked around your house?" I asked. "Just to put Mrs. Chen's concerns to rest." "Of course not. I have nothing to hide." Eleanor gave me a complete tour. Living room, kitchen, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms. Everything was normal, nothing suspicious. But as we moved through the house, I noticed that every room had at least one window facing toward the other houses on the street. And each window had a chair positioned for optimal viewing. "You spend a lot of time at these windows," I observed. "I enjoy watching the neighborhood," Eleanor said. "It's like a living soap opera. Families coming and going, children playing, people living their lives. It makes me feel connected to the community." That evening, I drove through Eleanor's neighborhood again, this time paying attention to sight lines and acoustics. From her house, she had visual access to at least 6 other homes. But could she really hear private conversations from 150 feet away? I was about to close the case as a personality conflict when Margaret Chen called me at home. "Detective, something happened tonight that changes everything." What happened next changed everything. You won't want to miss how it unfolded. Margaret's voice was shaking as she explained the evening's events. My daughter Emma was doing homework in her bedroom, the room that faces Eleanor's house. Around 8 p.m., Emma's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Margaret read me the message. "Emma, you should focus more on your algebra and less on texting your boyfriend. Your grades are more important than teenage romance." Detective, Emma was texting her boyfriend while pretending to do homework. She was sitting at her desk with her back to the window, phone in her lap where no one could see it. The only way someone could know what she was doing is if they were inside her room. This changed everything. Even with binoculars or telescopic equipment, Eleanor couldn't have seen Emma's phone activity from her house. "There's more," Margaret continued. After Emma got that text, she went to her window and looked toward Eleanor's house. She swears she saw a light go off in Eleanor's bedroom, like someone had quickly turned off a device or screen. I obtained a warrant to search Eleanor's property the next morning. What we found in her basement made my blood run cold. The basement had been converted into a sophisticated surveillance center. Multiple monitors displayed live feeds from cameras positioned throughout the neighborhood. I counted feeds from at least 8 different houses, showing interior rooms, backyards, and private spaces. Eleanor wasn't just watching her neighbors through windows. She had somehow installed cameras inside their homes. "How did you get cameras into these houses?" I demanded. Eleanor sat calmly on her basement couch, surrounded by the evidence of her crimes. "People invite strangers into their homes more often than you'd think, Detective. Repair services, delivery personnel, house cleaners, babysitters. It's amazing how invisible you become when you're wearing the right uniform." She had been systematically infiltrating her neighbors' homes over the past 8 months, posing as various service providers to install hidden cameras. The operation was sophisticated and planned with military precision. "But why?" I asked. "Why do this to people who've done nothing to you?" "Because they're living wrong," Eleanor replied, her warm smile finally fading. "These people have no idea how to conduct their lives properly. They're wasteful, careless, raising their children incorrectly. Someone needs to guide them, to help them make better choices." I looked at the monitors showing live feeds from bedrooms, kitchens, living rooms. Private moments stolen and watched by someone who believed she had the right to judge and interfere. The text to Emma wasn't just surveillance. I realized. You were actively manipulating these families. Eleanor's expression brightened again. I prefer to think of it as gentle guidance. A nudge in the right direction when someone makes poor choices. She showed me files on each family, detailed psychological profiles, behavioral analyses, intervention strategies. Eleanor had been conducting social experiments on her neighbors, treating them like subjects in a laboratory. The Hendersons were having marriage problems, she explained matter-of-factly. I left anonymous notes, suggesting they seek counseling. The Patels were neglecting their elderly father. I arranged for home health services to contact them. The Williams family was living beyond their means. I made sure they received financial planning brochures. You've been manipulating these people's lives for months. I've been helping them. Eleanor corrected. They're happier now. The Hendersons' marriage is stronger. The Patels are taking better care of their father. The Williams family is more financially responsible. I've improved their lives. That's when I understood the true horror of what Eleanor had done. She hadn't just violated these families' privacy, she had become their puppet master, pulling invisible strings to orchestrate their behavior according to her vision of how they should live. This is the climax. Everything you've been waiting for is right here. Stay to see how it all unfolded. The full scope of Eleanor's operation became clear as we processed the evidence. She had infiltrated 12 homes over 8 months, installing cameras in bedrooms, bathrooms, kitchens, and living rooms. Every private moment, every intimate conversation, every vulnerable instant had been recorded and analyzed. But the cameras were just the beginning. Eleanor had created detailed psychological profiles of every family member, including the children. She knew their fears, their insecurities, their relationship dynamics. She had used this information to manipulate them through anonymous letters, mysterious phone calls, and strategic interventions. The Morgan family was about to divorce, Eleanor explained as she was being processed. Their communication had broken down completely. So I started leaving notes for them to find, messages that seemed to come from each other, expressing the love they were too proud to voice. You forged communications between a married couple? I facilitated their emotional healing, Eleanor insisted. They're together now, happier than ever. Their children have a stable home because of my intervention. The evidence revealed dozens of similar manipulations. Eleanor had orchestrated job opportunities, romantic encounters, family reunions, and major life decisions for her neighbors. She had been playing God with 12 families, and many of them had no idea their lives had been artificially arranged. Mrs. Chen suspected something, Eleanor continued. She was the only one who noticed the pattern. The others were grateful for the positive changes in their lives. They attributed their good fortune to luck or divine intervention. During the trial, we heard testimony from Eleanor's victims. The psychological impact was devastating. Families learned that their most private moments had been watched and recorded. Parents discovered that their children's personal struggles had been monitored and manipulated by a stranger. But the most disturbing testimony came from the families who had benefited from Eleanor's interventions. Several admitted they had been happier during the period when Eleanor was secretly managing their lives. I know it's wrong, testified David Henderson, whose marriage Eleanor had saved through psychological manipulation. But our relationship has never been better than it was during those months. She knew exactly what we needed to hear from each other. Eleanor was sentenced to 15 years for invasion of privacy, harassment, and identity theft. But the families she had manipulated were left to wonder which of their thoughts, feelings, and decisions had actually been their own. The case was closed, but the aftermath haunted everyone involved. The 12 families had to rebuild their lives knowing that their most intimate moments had been observed and their major decisions had been influenced by a stranger who believed she knew better than they did how to live. 6 months after Eleanor's conviction, I received a letter at the station. No return address, postmarked from across the state. Detective Hoffman, Eleanor Vance was my mentor. She taught me that people need guidance to live properly, but she was too obvious about it. I've learned from her mistakes. I'm much more subtle in my methods. The families under my care will never suspect my presence, but their lives will be infinitely better because of my invisible hand guiding them toward happiness. Thank you for the case study. It helped me perfect my techniques. I've moved 3 times since receiving that letter. I check my house for hidden cameras regularly. I've become paranoid about repair services, delivery personnel, anyone who might have access to my home. Because now I know the truth that Eleanor revealed. In our connected world, privacy is an illusion. Someone is always watching, always recording, always ready to step in and rearrange our lives according to their vision of how we should live. The most terrifying part isn't being watched, it's being helped. When someone believes they're improving your life through invisible manipulation, you might never realize that your happiness isn't actually your own. Eleanor Vance is in prison, but her letter suggests she wasn't working alone. Somewhere, other puppet masters are pulling invisible strings, orchestrating lives, and playing God with families who believe they're living freely. Look around your neighborhood. Notice who pays too much attention, who knows too much, who always seems to be in the right place at the right time. Because the person helping you might be the person controlling you. And you'll never know the difference until it's too late. The first time Rachel Morrison called our department, I almost dismissed her as another paranoid citizen seeing conspiracies and coincidences. Detective Kim Torres here, 22 years with the Portland PD, and I've heard every variation of, "Someone's following me," that exists. But Rachel's case was different. She had documentation. Rachel was 34, worked as a software engineer for a tech startup downtown. Lived alone in a quiet apartment complex, no criminal history, no restraining orders, no obvious enemies. The kind of person who should have been invisible to trouble. She came to the station on a rainy Thursday morning, carrying a manila folder thick with printed emails, screenshots, and handwritten notes. Her hands shook as she placed it on my desk. "Detective Torres, someone is systematically destroying my life, and I can prove it." I opened the folder and found 6 months of meticulous documentation. Bank statements showing mysterious charges that had been reversed. Employment records showing complaints filed against her that were later withdrawn. Medical appointments that had been cancelled without her knowledge, then rescheduled incorrectly. "These all look like administrative errors," I said. "Inconvenient, but not criminal." "That's what I thought at first," Rachel replied. "But look at the pattern." She spread the documents across my desk in chronological order. Every 2 weeks, like clockwork, something in Rachel's life would go wrong. A bill would be paid incorrectly, causing late fees. Her car insurance would be cancelled due to missed payments she had never missed. Her apartment maintenance requests would be lost, causing ongoing problems. "Each incident is small enough to be explained as human error," Rachel explained. "But taken together, over 6 months, it's clear someone is targeting me." I studied the timeline. The incidents were remarkably consistent, always on Tuesdays, always involving different institutions, always resolved just enough to avoid serious consequences but causing maximum inconvenience and stress. "Who would want to do this to you, Rachel? That's what's driving me crazy," she said. "I've racked my brain for enemies, ex-boyfriends, disgruntled coworkers. I can't think of anyone who would hate me enough to do this, but not enough to do something more direct." Rachel pulled out another set of documents. "There's more. My internet service gets randomly disconnected during important work meetings. My grocery orders are cancelled right before delivery. My prescription pickups get delayed, causing me to miss doses of my anxiety medication." The psychological impact was clear. Rachel looked exhausted, constantly looking over her shoulder, jumping at small sounds. Someone was waging a war of attrition against her mental health. "Have you noticed anyone following you? Suspicious activity around your home or workplace?" "That's just it," Rachel said. "I never see anyone. No strange cars, no unfamiliar faces, no obvious surveillance. Whoever is doing this is completely invisible." I took Rachel's case seriously, but my initial investigation turned up nothing. The companies involved all had records of the incidents she described, but their systems showed legitimate customer service requests or technical errors. No evidence of external manipulation. Rachel's bank showed the suspicious charges, but they appeared to be genuine transactions from her account, later reversed when she disputed them. Her employer confirmed the complaints filed against her, but couldn't identify who had made them. They had come through anonymous channels that were later discovered to be false. Every lead was a dead end. Every institution had plausible explanations for what had happened. But the pattern Rachel had identified was undeniable. 2 weeks later, Rachel called me in tears. "Detective, it's escalating. Someone got into my apartment. I rushed to Rachel's building and found her waiting in the lobby, afraid to go back to her unit alone. The apartment manager, Mrs. Kim, was with her, looking confused and concerned. "Nothing appears to be stolen," Mrs. Kim explained. "But things have been rearranged." Rachel's apartment looked normal at first glance. But as she walked through each room, the subtle violations became apparent. Books on her shelves were in different orders. Clothing in her drawers had been carefully folded but placed in wrong locations. Items in her bathroom had been moved just slightly from their usual positions. "Someone was here for a long time," Rachel said, her voice hollow. "They went through everything, but they were careful not to make it obvious. If I wasn't so particular about where I keep things, I might not have noticed." The most unsettling discovery was in Rachel's bedroom. Her laptop had been moved from her desk to her dresser, and when she opened it, she found that someone had been browsing through her personal files, photos, and emails. Nothing was deleted, but the browser history showed that someone had spent hours studying her life. "They know everything about me now," Rachel whispered. "My work projects, my family photos, my medical records, my dating history. Everything." I processed the scene, but there were no signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, no physical evidence. Whoever had done this was a professional. That's when Mrs. Kim mentioned something that changed everything. "You know, there was a maintenance request for your unit yesterday," she told Rachel. "Something about checking the plumbing connections. The worker had proper credentials, seemed legitimate." "I never requested any maintenance," Rachel said. Mrs. Kim checked her records. "The request came through our online portal, from your resident account. It showed your electronic signature and everything. We reviewed the building's security footage and found the maintenance worker entering Rachel's building, but the person was wearing a uniform, baseball cap, and kept their face turned away from cameras. Professional surveillance countermeasures." Rachel's tormentor had escalated from digital harassment to physical invasion. But we still had no idea who was behind it or why. What happened next changed everything. You won't want to miss how it unfolded. 3 days after the apartment break-in, Rachel's life began to unravel at an accelerated pace. Her employer received an anonymous tip that she had been stealing company software and selling it to competitors. Her landlord was contacted about noise complaints from neighbors who claimed she was running an illegal business from her apartment. Her bank froze her accounts due to suspicious activity that triggered their fraud detection systems. Each allegation was false, but proving her innocence required time, energy, and resources that Rachel was rapidly running out of. She was suspended from work pending investigation. Her apartment complex began eviction proceedings. Her financial accounts remained frozen while the bank conducted their investigation. "Whoever is doing this knows exactly how to weaponize bureaucracy," Rachel told me during our meeting that Friday. "They understand that even false accusations create real consequences while they're being investigated." But it was the psychological warfare that was truly devastating. Rachel started receiving strange packages at her apartment. Items she hadn't ordered, charged to credit accounts that had been opened in her name without her knowledge. The packages contained personal items, clothes in her exact size, books on topics she was interested in, food items that matched her dietary preferences. "They're not just watching me," Rachel realized. "They're studying me like a laboratory specimen." The packages came with notes written in generic, computer-printed text. "Thought you might enjoy this. This reminded me of you. Hope this brightens your day." The false intimacy was more terrifying than any direct threat. Rachel's mental health deteriorated rapidly. She stopped sleeping, convinced that someone was watching her apartment. She became paranoid about every phone call, every email, every knock on her door. The sustained psychological pressure was achieving its intended goal, breaking her down completely. That's when I decided to take an unconventional approach. Instead of trying to catch Rachel's tormentor in the act, I started investigating Rachel herself. What I found made my blood run cold. Rachel Morrison didn't exist. The woman sitting in my office, the victim I had been trying to help for weeks, had no verifiable history before 18 months ago. Her employment records, apartment lease, bank accounts, even her driver's license. All of it had been created within the past year and a half. Her social security number belonged to a Rachel Morrison who had died in infancy 34 years ago. Her employment references led to phone numbers that went to voicemail boxes set up specifically to provide fake credentials. Her apartment application had been supported by fabricated financial documents. The woman I knew as Rachel Morrison was living under a stolen identity, and someone had discovered her secret. But that wasn't the most disturbing revelation. When I dug deeper into the real Rachel Morrison's death certificate, I found that the infant had died in Portland 34 years ago. Her parents were listed as Robert and Helen Morrison, who had moved away shortly after their daughter's death. I contacted Robert Morrison, now living in Phoenix. After some hesitation, he agreed to speak with me about his deceased daughter. "Detective, we've been looking for the woman using our Rachel's identity for over 2 years," he told me. "She stole our daughter's social security number, her birth certificate, her entire identity. We've tried to report it, but the police said there wasn't enough evidence for prosecution." "What do you mean, looking for her?" "We hired a private investigator," Robert explained. "We wanted to know who would desecrate our daughter's memory by stealing her identity. The investigator has been tracking her movements, documenting her activities, gathering evidence." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Rachel wasn't being persecuted by a random stalker. She was being hunted by the parents of the child whose identity she had stolen, and they had hired a professional to systematically destroy the life she had built on their daughter's stolen name. This is the climax. Everything you've been waiting for is right here. Stay to see how it all unfolded. I confronted the woman I knew as Rachel Morrison with the evidence I had uncovered. Her carefully constructed facade crumbled instantly. "My real name is Jennifer Walsh," she admitted, tears streaming down her face. "I've been running for 3 years from an abusive relationship that nearly ended my life. I needed a new identity to disappear completely." Jennifer's story was heartbreaking but didn't excuse identity theft. She had been in a relationship with Marcus Webb, a tech executive who had used his connections and resources to control every aspect of her life. When she tried to leave him, he had tracked her across multiple states, using private investigators and technology to find her wherever she went. "I tried going through legal channels," Jennifer explained. "Restraining orders, witness protection programs, victim services. Nothing worked. Marcus has too much money, too many connections. He kept finding me." In desperation, Jennifer had assumed the identity of Rachel Morrison, believing that becoming someone else was the only way to truly escape her abuser. She had lived quietly for 18 months, building a new life, staying under the radar. But the Morrisons' private investigator had found her. "The harassment you've been experiencing," I realized, "it's not coming from the Morrisons. They just wanted to expose your identity theft. Someone else has been tormenting you." Jennifer's face went pale. "Marcus. He found me again." The systematic persecution, the psychological warfare, the escalating invasions of privacy, it all matched the pattern of behavior Jennifer had described from her abusive relationship. Marcus Webb had discovered her new identity, and was using it to destroy her sense of security once again. But this time, he had been more sophisticated. Instead of direct confrontation, he had orchestrated a campaign of subtle terrorism designed to make Jennifer question her own sanity, while slowly dismantling the life she had built. "He's been watching me for months," Jennifer whispered. "Learning my routines, my vulnerabilities, my fears. The break-in, the packages, the bureaucratic sabotage, it's all his style. He wants me to know that I can never escape him." I immediately began investigating Marcus Webb and found a disturbing pattern. 3 other women had reported similar harassment campaigns over the past 5 years. All were former partners of Webb who had tried to leave him. All had experienced systematic persecution that escalated until they either returned to him or completely broke down. One woman, Sarah Chin, had committed herself to a psychiatric facility after months of the kind of psychological torture Jennifer was experiencing. Another, Lisa Park, had moved back in with Webb after her life was destroyed by mysterious bureaucratic problems and financial sabotage. The third woman, Amanda Foster, had disappeared entirely after reporting that someone was breaking into her apartment and rearranging her belongings. Marcus Webb was using his considerable resources to wage psychological warfare against women who tried to leave him, and the system had failed to recognize the pattern because his methods were so sophisticated and his victims often had complicated legal situations. But now I had evidence, and I had a victim willing to cooperate despite the risks to her false identity. The investigation into Marcus Webb revealed a network of corrupt officials, private investigators, and technology experts who helped wealthy clients handle personal problems through extralegal means. Webb had been paying for professional harassment services, using his tech connections to manipulate digital systems and his financial resources to corrupt institutional processes. We arrested Webb and 17 members of his network on charges ranging from stalking to identity theft to conspiracy. The evidence we gathered showed that they had been terrorizing dozens of victims over the past decade, all people who had somehow crossed their wealthy clients. But the arrest didn't bring Jennifer the peace she had hoped for. "Detective," she said during our final meeting, "I'm still not safe. Marcus has friends, resources, connections I don't even know about. And I'm still living under a stolen identity. The Morrisons have every right to press charges against me." I had spoken with Robert and Helen Morrison about Jennifer's situation. They were compassionate people who understood that she had stolen their daughter's identity out of desperation rather than malice. They agreed not to pursue prosecution if Jennifer worked with authorities to assume a legal identity and entered witness protection. But Jennifer refused witness protection. "I can't live in hiding forever," she said. "I won't let Marcus take away my right to exist in the world." 6 months later, I received a call from a detective in Seattle. A woman named Jennifer Walsh had been found dead in her apartment, apparent suicide. She had left a note saying she couldn't run anymore. The Seattle detective was calling because they had found my business card and Jennifer's belongings, along with a letter addressed to me. "Detective Torres, Marcus Webb was released on bail 3 weeks ago. Since then, I've received packages containing photos of my new apartment, my new job, my new daily routines. The harassment has started again, but now it's more subtle, more sophisticated. He learned from his mistakes. I know he's reading this letter. I know he's been in my apartment, going through my things, studying me like a laboratory animal again. The difference is that this time, I'm not afraid. I'm tired. Marcus, if you're reading this, you won. But your victory is hollow. You destroyed me, but you'll never own me. And Detective Torres will make sure everyone knows what kind of monster you really are." The pattern continues, but now it's documented. The next woman won't be alone. Marcus Webb's alibi for the time of Jennifer's death was solid. He was in Los Angeles at a tech conference, surrounded by witnesses. But I knew he had killed her just as surely as if he had pushed her off a building. The case was closed, but the investigation revealed a network of wealthy predators who use their resources to psychologically destroy anyone who threatens them. Jennifer Walsh was just one victim in a system that allows the powerful to weaponize bureaucracy, technology, and corruption against the vulnerable. I still get calls from women experiencing the kind of systematic persecution that Jennifer endured. Most of them are dismissed as paranoid or delusional. But I know the pattern now, and I know that behind every victim is a predator with enough money and connections to make their lives a living hell. Jennifer's letter was right, the pattern continues. But now it's documented, and the next woman won't be alone. The most terrifying truth is that in our connected world, anyone with enough resources can destroy your life without leaving fingerprints. They can turn every system against you, make you question your own sanity, and isolate you from help until you break. Marcus Webb served 18 months for stalking and was released last year. He's back in Portland now, working at a new tech company, living in a penthouse downtown. And women keep calling me about mysterious problems with their banks, their employers, their landlords. Problems that follow a pattern I recognize all too well. The predators are still hunting. The only question is whether their next victim will recognize the pattern before it's too late. Thanks so much for watching. I can't express enough how much your support means. The likes, the comments, it all really helps the channel grow. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I always take the time to read them. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on any new videos. See you next time.